The 5 permanent members of the Security Council can use their veto rights to block many UN actions. Now the rule is changed. However, this does not change the balance of power there. The United Nations General Assembly has unanimously adopted a resolution to counteract the use of the veto by the permanent members of the Security Council. The decision, introduced by Liechtenstein and supported by Germany and a number of other countries, requires a meeting of the General Assembly within 10 days whenever a veto is used in the 15-member Security Council. In the body, with all representatives of the 193 countries, the state or states that have made use of their veto would then have to explain themselves. The resolution is intended to put further pressure on the veto powers to refrain from their privilege of blocking any legally binding decisions by the most powerful UN body. The USA, Russia, China, Great Britain and France, which emerged as the most powerful states from the Second World War, were given the right of veto as part of a compromise in the founding of the United Nations. Russia, and the United States in particular, have exercised this right since 1946 with a total of over 200 vetoes. China has used it more and more frequently in recent years, albeit much less frequently overall. Britain and France last vetoed it in 1989. Germany, Brazil, India and Japan do not see the current global balance of power reflected in the Security Council and have been trying to reform it for years. Most recently, the pressure for reform of the UN Security Council has increased in view of the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine. As a permanent member of the Council, aggressor Russia had blocked all measures to calm the conflict. Calls for sanctions or even Moscow's exclusion from the Security Council grew louder. According to the UN Charter, however, this is practically impossible because Russia could also veto the curtailment of its own rights. Tuesday's General Assembly decision was not actively opposed by Russia and even supported by the United States. The new justification measures in front of all member states may be unpleasant for the veto powers, but their power will not be curtailed. But how does the UN Security Council actually work? According to Article 24 of the UN Charter, the United Nations Security Council bears primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security, hence the name. If the Security Council identifies a threat to international security, a breach of the peace or an act of aggression, it has a wide range of possible reactions. As a rule, they first ask the conflicting parties to come to a peaceful agreement. However, the Security Council can also conduct its own investigations, mediate or set conditions for the settlement of conflicts, for example, draw up a ceasefire agreement. More far-reaching measures that interfere with the sovereignty of states are, for example, non-military sanctions, such as the interruption of trade and transport routes or communication links. Military measures, such as naval blockades, airstrikes, or the deployment of ground troops or observers, are also possible. By joining the United Nations, states undertake to implement the decisions of the Security Council. In practice, however, the Security Council also relies on a high level of voluntary support. For example, unlike what was originally envisaged in the UN Charter, it does not have its own soldiers. Troops must be provided by the member states. The United Nations Security Council has 15 members, including 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent members. The permanent members, as I said, Great Britain, France, Russia, China and the USA, are permanent members of the body and, as the victorious powers of the Second World War or their successors, in case of Russia for example, have special powers with the so-called right of veto. Each of the states can prevent decisions by the Security Council on its own. According to the UN Charter, Security Council resolutions on procedural issues require a majority of 9 votes, with the permanent members also being able to abstain. Procedural issues include resolutions on the agenda and the course of meetings or the invitation to attend meetings. Resolutions on all other questions also require a majority of 9 votes, including the votes of all permanent members. In practice, this regulation has resulted in a complex system of negotiations and voting processes, since the so-called veto powers use their voting rights to mutually block decisions particularly during the East-West conflict. The non-permanent members are elected by the General Assembly of the United Nations for 2 years from among the UN member states according to an informal regional key. 3 seats are allocated to African countries, 2 each to countries from Asia, Latin America and Europe, including the rest of the world, and 1 to the countries from Eastern Europe. The Secretary General of the United Nations attends the meetings of the Security Council, but has no voting rights. The Security Council also proposes candidates for the post of Secretary General, who is then appointed by the General Assembly. The composition of the Security Council is a key criticism of the United Nations. For example, as I said, the German government argues that the permanent membership still reflects the post-World War II balance of power, which is no longer representative of today's world order. Germany is therefore campaigning for a reform of the Security Council and a permanent seat for the European Union in this body. But I'm quite sure that all of the permanent members, or most of the permanent members, will fight it to the core. And seriously, from my naive point of outside view, I don't think that this will ever happen. It's the only way to do this would be to start a new United Nations from scratch. Seriously. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.